Good afternoon to you. An astonishing statement in a way from the president there. There can be no bullying of one nation by another nation. All are equal. It would seem he's responding to one particular nation.
I think without questions, Stephen, it cannot be that a country's geographical location or income or army determines who has a voice and who is spoken down to. I think it's absolutely clear that while that speech was being made to the G20 Social, it was also aimed at an audience of one back in the Oval Office, President Donald Trump. And this, of course, is coming after we learnt that 5 days ago, the US Embassy in Pretoria sent a diplomatic note to DIRCO insisting that even though the United States has completely withdrawn at a governmental level from this G20 Leaders Summit, President Trump absolutely still wants to condition the outcome of this summit by warning President Ramaphosa under no circumstances to release a joint declaration and to claim that it has been forged by consensus. The president in the past has referred, President Ramaphosa, to the possibility of a declaration that is achieved through significant consensus. The US saying absolutely not and instructing him in very stark linguistic terms only to release a chair's statement at the end of this summit. So to hear that message to the G20 Social there, in which the president was also, in this long speech about global health, his concerns about the disappearance of USAID funding. He didn't mention USAID specifically, but again, absolutely clear about who he was talking to and referring about. Climate change references there, lots of focus, of course, on equality, the equality aspect of the three pillars of this G20 summit, the other two, of course, being solidarity and sustainability. All of those notions completely rejected by the US government, which they make clear in that diplomatic note to DIRCO. Those policy approaches, they say, are not aligned with US values. I think this is part of what has become, over the last few days, a much tougher approach to the US president from South Africa's president. And it's going to be interesting to see how world leaders respond to all of that as they arrive here.
So we have President Ramaphosa's comments now. 2 days ago at a Bloomberg event, the International Relations Minister, Ronald Lamola, essentially saying, I won't have the quote directly, but essentially saying that, that the G20 should be an opportunity for the rest of the world to perhaps move on from the US. I think the phrase move on was there. He is essentially saying the rest of the world may need to do what it wants to do without being, well, to use Ramaphosa's language now, bullied.
Yeah, he said with or without the United States. And Minister Lamola also said the G20 cannot be paralyzed in terms of achieving a declaration simply because one country has chosen not to participate in it. And I think, again, now that we know they received that diplomatic note from the embassy on the 15th of November, and here we are on the 20th of November, I think we get a very clear sense that the attitude has hardened because they are protecting the sanctity of this multilateral process. We saw the French government yesterday moving very quickly, Emmanuel Macron through government officials, to back up President Ramaphosa in his desire still to try and get to a declaration at the end of this G20 summit. A more pugnacious approach also from the South African government, which previously had said it would hand the gavel over to an empty chair at the end of the summit, because remember, next year's summit is being hosted in the United States. So under normal circumstances, there would be the ceremonial passing of the gavel from President Ramaphosa to President Trump, or at least Vice President J.D. Vance. Now they're basically saying, well, the G20 presidency is going to be absent until there's a point at which someone from the United States decides to come and pick this up. I think that there's a real challenge for world leaders arriving here to decide if this is the moment this weekend where they draw a line in the sand and say to President Trump, if you don't want to be part of this, if you want no role in this, that's fine, but we are not going to cave into you. We are going to crack on with the work that we've got to do here.
So for some countries, it's obvious. I mean, I would expect that Brazil would probably stand with
Sure.
South Africa. Our societies are very similar in so many ways. France for, well, quite long-term historical reasons as well. Some are a bit more complicated. I mean, in Canada, the domestic political situation around the Prime Minister there, Mark Carney, might well be that actually any opportunity he has to stand up to Trump, he's going to take it. He's a very canny politician, I'm sure he will. But, for example, Britain is a bit more complicated. And if you don't have anything like, to use the President's words, near consensus, South Africa can't really do it on its own.
Well, huge questions, I think, going into this weekend for the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who has not yet even found the language to dismiss President Trump's suggestion that there is a genocide taking place in South Africa, dances around the issue and won't actually say, no, there is no genocide taking place in South Africa. So is he going to echo the approach that Emmanuel Macron has taken at this summit? I mean, we've seen examples in the past where European leaders, when they traveled jointly to Washington, D.C. to protect Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House after President Trump's Alaska summit with President Putin, we saw Olaf Scholz of Germany and Emmanuel Macron publicly standing up to Trump, and Starmer notably being the man in the room who didn't want to do that. So I think questions for him. Conversely, Donald Trump's going to have some friends around that table, even though the Argentinian president, Javier Milei, is not coming. There is going to be an Argentinian delegation here, and it will be interesting to see what kind of role they play in forging all of the language that may or may not get contained in a declaration. The Mexican leader, Claudia Sheinbaum, she's not coming. She's sending the foreign minister here. So it will be very interesting to see how this all plays out.
And some countries like Japan also have relatively new leaders and also have defense interests tied up with the United States. I mean, for many countries, Starmer too perhaps, messing with the US can be dangerous, as we have discovered.
Yes, I mean, I think from what I'm seeing here over the last few days, you're coming out of the other end of the prism and saying there seems to be no reparation possible to this relationship. So let's just move on. Let's just forge a different direction and be firmer in the way in which we're dealing with Donald Trump. I think there will be other world leaders around that table that, as you say, are much more nervous about reaching that situation. But the notion that they are coming here to discover that an American president whose government is playing absolutely no role now, not just in this summit, but in the final preparatory meetings for it, since in that fit of pique 2 weeks ago, he suddenly pulled the rug out from under J.D. Vance, to the vice president's surprise, and said, right, no one's going. I think it will be very challenging for the other G20 leaders sitting around that table to decide exactly whether they're going to listen to the threat that's being made by the Americans in that diplomatic note to Durko, or whether they are, like President Macron, going to say, we need to do a declaration here.
Simon Marks, our international correspondent, thank you very much indeed. Part of the team covering the G20 for you. The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, due to just come out of that gathering in a moment, obviously waiting to see if he does and if he'll take questions as well. We have a team on standby for you there.